the beginning, a boy walked out of a shop, announcing he was heading out. Staff members thanked him for working so hard and addressed him by his name, Samura. He bolted forward, knowing he couldn't waste any time. Today marked the moment he'd been counting down to for weeks. His heart raced as he sprinted through the streets, and he couldn't stop thinking about one thing: a girl. She had short silver hair that caught the light beautifully, and her eyes slanted upward in a way that made her seem cool and distant. Inside a nearby store, Samura's expression lit up with excitement. He'd found exactly what he was searching for. Grinning widely, he held up the merchandise and whispered that it was Sech-chan's character goods. In his mind, he knew that Simata was a character from the hottest romance comedy manga currently sweeping the nation, a series called Ajama. The story had gripped him from the start. The main character, Yuichi, had fallen hard for the heroine Sho after meeting her in high school. But there was a twist. Yuichi's wealthy childhood friend, Kaori, also harbored feelings for him, and she wielded her family's power to sabotage their relationship constantly. He remembered how the manga captivated readers with its mix of characters. Sho growing closer to Yuichi, the conniving Kaori scheming to win him over, and countless others creating an entertaining, dramatic love triangle. The delicate balance of affection and conflict had earned widespread praise. In typical romance manga fashion, he knew there were always supporting female characters alongside the main heroine. One of those characters was his favorite, Simata, Sho's closest friend, often called the losing heroine because she wouldn't end up with the main character. Later, Samura walked down the street, lost in thought about how most readers probably fell in love with one of the main heroines and rallied behind her, holding their breath to see who'd ultimately win. He clutched the merchandise against his chest and smiled, though he quickly caught himself. He didn't want anyone seeing him grin like a foolish fan. He stuffed it into his bag and spoke happily about how the anime adaptation had brought so much new merchandise. Suddenly, as he turned his head, his stomach dropped. A truck barreled straight toward him, and his mind screamed in terror. Was this really how he'd die? He saw the massive vehicle heading his way and realized he was on the sidewalk. The driver must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Everything seemed to move in slow motion now. He desperately wished he wasn't about to die. He'd never see the end of Ajama. Deep down, he knew Sech-chan's love would go unrequited. He was just a high school student with so much left to experience, so many stories left to follow. There were countless things he wanted to do and discover in his future. The truck struck him hard, and the world went black. The boy jolted awake, confused and disoriented. He touched his face as his eyes fluttered open, groaning that his head felt incredibly heavy. What was happening? He found himself walking through a school hallway, bewildered about where he was. This didn't look like his school at all. He examined his uniform and realized it was completely different from what he wore back home. When he touched his body, the memory hit him. A truck had just hit him. His expression twisted in fear and confusion. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. What on earth was going on? Maybe the truck crash had sent him into a coma, and this was all just a dream playing out in his mind. From a nearby room, Hisamura heard voices talking about Sech-chan. Another voice mentioned that Sho kept hesitating about something. His face went pale as he recognized those voices. They belonged to people he'd heard countless times in audio dramas tied to the manga. He realized with growing shock that these were Sho Fuji and Simata from Ajama. Through the open door, he heard Sho saying that Yuichi definitely needed both of them by his side, and she worried she'd just be a nuisance to them. Hisamura couldn't believe what he was witnessing with his own eyes. Simata responded that it had nothing to do with Tojo, and that what truly mattered was how Sho felt inside. Sho asked what she meant, and Hisamura recognized this exact scene. It was where Sho was wrestling with whether to accept Yuichi's date invitation. Watching from the doorway with his heart pounding, he understood the scene perfectly. Yuichi had asked her out, but since his childhood friend Kaori was so possessive, Sho was second-guessing herself. The person encouraging Sho to make a brave choice was none other than Simata herself. She asked directly whether Sho loved Yuichi, and Sho replied with certainty, yes. Simata cheered her on, insisting that if Yuichi was asking her to go on a date, it absolutely meant he cared about her. Sho nodded in agreement, thanked Simata for talking to her, and ran off with newfound determination. Shimada called out to encourage her as she left. Hisamura heard Sho's voice fade as she spoke to herself, pumping herself up to do her best. This was his favorite moment from the entire series. The scene that had made him fall in love with Shimada in the first place. With tears threatening to spill, he thought about how Sech-chan harbored her own crush on the main character. At first, Shimada had found Sho's constant interaction with Yuichi annoying, but over time and through countless shared moments, she developed real feelings for him. Yet she also knew without question that Sho loved Yuichi too. That's why Shimada had chosen to be their biggest supporter, pushing Sho and Yuichi together even though it cost her dearly. Seeing this scene played out, Hisamura realized she'd forced her own emotions to stay buried inside her heart. That was exactly why he'd fallen in love with her, because she could be genuinely happy for her friend, even at the cost of her own heart. Shimada suddenly turned around and asked who was there, pulling open the door to reveal the boy. She called him Hisamura and asked if he'd overheard their conversation. Hisamura froze, shocked to find Shimada standing right in front of him. He apologized, saying he hadn't meant to listen in, but then confusion washed over him. Why had she called him by that name? He hadn't seen this exact scene play out in the original story, yet the words that suddenly came from his mouth were straight from the manga itself. In disbelief, he wondered if he'd somehow become Tsukasa Hisamura. He recalled who this character was. Tsukasa Hisamura appeared in Ajama as a reliable friend of the main character, Yuichi. This character always worked to lighten the mood whenever Yuichi felt trapped in his love triangle, and he offered genuine advice when things got serious. He was crucial to the story, but stayed completely uninvolved in the romantic drama. Hisamura was stunned. They shared the exact same first and last name, and their bodies and voices were eerily similar too. Tsukasa was actually one of his favorite characters, though he insisted he wasn't doing an impression. Still, even if this was just a dream, how lucky could he be? He was witnessing his favorite scene from a front row seat, and his best girl had even called out his name directly. He found himself speaking lines again, asking Sho if she was truly comfortable with this situation, given that Shimada was also attracted to Yuichi. Hisamura felt shock at his own words. He was speaking on his own again. Would this keep happening until the story ended? Shimada gave him a sad smile and said this was fine because she'd already confirmed whether Yuichi and Sho matched well together. With genuine warmth, she added that she didn't fit between them. They were a match made in destiny. Hisamura's face turned red, and he stared at Shimada's beautiful, caring expression. Her smile made him fall for her all over again, but that very same smile was the one that broke her own heart. He clenched his fists tightly and thought about how he couldn't stand seeing her wear such a painful expression just because she loved the main character. Right then and there, he decided to change the story where she remained unhappy. He confessed to her with intensity, telling her he loved her and begging her to give him a chance. His face blazed with embarrassment as he spoke. He thought about how true happiness for the character you adored was the ultimate reward for devoted fans like himself. Shimada's eyes widened in surprise, her cheeks flushing bright red. Hisamura continued passionately, saying he loved her kindness toward her friends most of all, and he really admired how cool Sech-chan looked. Her short silver hair made her appear both strong and beautiful at the same time. Shimada turned crimson, flustered, and told him to wait. She pointed out that calling her Sech-chan was something he'd never done before. She emphasized that Hisamura had never addressed her that way, until this very moment. Hisamura felt his heart race as he realized how adorable she looked when embarrassed. This dream had just become the greatest gift ever because she'd felt like an untouchable character before. Now they were having a real conversation, and he could even tell her exactly how he felt. Believing this was his only real shot, Hisamura prepared to pour out everything. He continued enthusiastically that he loved her gentleness, how much she cared about Sho, and that she'd even researched Yuichi to help her friend. He kept talking about how charming it was that she'd fallen for someone over time. It made her easy to understand, but incredibly cute too. Most of all, he loved how she sacrificed her own feelings for her friend's sake. Shimada blushed intensely, asking if he was trying to make her angry. His expression darkened as he replied that he hated seeing her do that to herself. Shimada reacted with shock, listening as he insisted she needed to find her own happiness. Still flushed, she said she didn't want to hear such things from him. Hisamura stepped closer, declaring that was exactly why he'd make her happy. Simata's face reddened further in surprise. Hisamura repeated his confession with absolute seriousness. He loved her, he would definitely make her happy, and he wanted her to be his girlfriend. Simata stood frozen, blushing deeply. Hisamura reflected on how Simata was the losing heroine in Ajama, and since the manga wasn't finished, the story would continue onward. He understood that Simata's love would stay unreciprocated as long as the plot followed its original path, but he desperately wanted her to find happiness. He truly didn't care what happened to Tsukasa Hisamura's character if it meant she could smile again. He couldn't bear to see her heartbroken smile or her suffering anymore. Simata shook with emotion and asked loudly if he was being serious about dating her. Hisamura answered with total conviction that of course he was. He'd even sacrifice everything for her. In his heart, he admitted he was a hopeless fan who'd spent all his money on her merchandise. Simata blushed heavily and asked him to slow down, wondering aloud if this was really how he naturally acted. She stepped backward nervously as Hisamura told her that Sech-chan was responsible for turning him into this devoted person. Simata panicked, saying he was scaring her by talking like that. Suddenly, she lost her footing and stumbled. Hisamura shouted a warning, and there was a loud clatter as he caught her with one arm, pulling her against his chest. Their heartbeats thundered loudly, and their faces were dangerously close. Hisamura apologized nervously while Simata told him it was okay. Sweating and turning crimson, Hisamura marveled at how close she was. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body, and he could see every delicate eyelash framing her large, round eyes. Simata found herself blushing as she hoped this moment would never end. Hisamura, thinking this was just a dream anyway, wondered if he could be a bit bolder. He asked what her answer was to his confession. Simata, caught off guard, asked what he meant. Hisamura clarified that he wanted to know her response to what he'd just declared. Simata, embarrassed, suggested they could discuss her answer at a better time. Hisamura refused, insisting he needed to know right now. Simata blushed deeply and complained that he was standing too close. Hisamura asked if her hesitation meant no, and he thought that since this was a dream, rejection wouldn't hurt as much, but he'd regret it forever if he woke up without knowing her true feelings. He told her firmly he wouldn't release her until she gave him an answer. Simata, hiding her flushed face, grumbled that he was being difficult and asked if he'd always been this pushy. Hisamura asked what she thought about his proposal. He wanted to know if it was okay for him to become her boyfriend. Simata continued blushing intensely, avoiding his gaze, and admitted that she thought he was genuinely kind and that becoming his girlfriend wasn't completely impossible. Hisamura pressed further, asking if she was willing to date him and be his girlfriend officially. Simata's face turned an even deeper shade of red as she stammered. Finally, she pushed him away forcefully and shouted that she couldn't do this. She bolted from the classroom, declaring she was going home. Hisamura collapsed to the floor in frustration, realizing she'd run away. He stood up and decided he absolutely had to make his feelings clear to her. He threw open the classroom door and yelled after her that he was serious and his love for her would never change, no matter what happened. He figured that even if he woke up right now and returned to his real world, she needed to hear this. When Simata turned around, Hisamura shouted with all his heart that he loved her so intensely and would absolutely make her happy. Simata's expression shifted to pure shock as she blushed. Hisamura promised himself that he'd always support her from here on out. Simata pointed at him while blushing furiously and demanded to know what he was saying so loudly, telling him to keep it down so she could think about his confession properly. She ran away, still flushed. Hisamura admitted he hadn't gotten a definitive answer, but he thought Simata looked incredibly cute when flustered. He smiled to himself, picked up his belongings, and decided it was time to head home for now. Then he paused and wondered when he'd finally wake up. He questioned where he should even return to before suddenly dropping everything in alarm as he wondered if he was actually waking up right then.